The storm did not come in gently. It hammered the mountains of northern Montana with a force that swallowed sound and breath and color. Snow whipped sideways, sharp as sand, and the world shrank to a trembling circle of white around a little girl and the puppy she refused to let go. Lily Carter pressed her back against the fallen trunk, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tight around Copper. The German Shepherd pup was barely the size of a winter coat sleeve, but he tried to be brave, nudging his cold nose under her chin as if he could shield her. Lily whispered his name again and again, a tiny chant meant more for comfort than hope. Copper, Copper, stay with me. Her lips were numb, but she kept lifting her hands to breathe warm air into her palms before pressing them to his shivering body. She did it over and over, like a ritual she didn't fully understand yet refused to stop. The wind howled above them, drowning out everything except the frantic flutter of Copper's heartbeat against her arms. His paws twitched from the cold. His whimpers grew smaller. Lily hugged him tighter, rocking him gently, fighting the heaviness settling in her own limbs. She didn't cry loudly, didn't scream. Something inside her already knew no one was close enough to hear. Farther up the slope, tire tracks were being filled in by snow. They stretched into the distance until they vanished into the white, the same direction the SUV had gone. The sound of its engine was long gone now, swallowed by the storm as if it had never existed. A strange thought flickered through Lily's mind, fragile and fleeting. Maybe Copper wasn't really hers. Maybe he was meant to belong to someone else, someone braver, someone who didn't get left behind. But Copper pushed his head against her chest again, as if answering a question she hadn't said out loud. No, he was hers, and she was his. For now that was enough. Lily glanced towards the trees. They shifted like shadows of giants, their tops disappearing into the storm. For a moment she thought she saw movement among them, the faint outline of a tall figure trudging through the snow. But when she blinked, it was gone. Just wind, just fear, just her imagination trying to save her. Copper whimpered, and Lily lowered her head until her forehead touched his. She whispered, "You're not alone. I'm not leaving you." But her body was tired. Too tired. Her breaths came slower. She felt Copper's tremors weaken under her hands. The storm pressed down as if testing how much the two of them could take before breaking. No one explained why they were out here. No one told her why the door had opened or why the car had pulled away. No one said anything at all. The snow kept falling. The cold crept closer. And somewhere beyond the trees, something stirred. Something that didn't belong to the storm. Something that had stopped, listening, as if it sensed the silent plea of a child and a puppy holding on to each other in the dark. If the cold didn't take them first, something else would. Jack Mercer had been moving through the forest for hours, his boots cutting a steady path through the deep Montana snow. He kept his pace measured, breath controlled, gaze sweeping the ridgelines the way years of training had taught him. The wind carried needles of frost that stung his face, but he barely noticed. Seals were built for environments worse than this. Still, something about today pressed on him in a way he couldn't name. His mission was simple on paper: recover a downed reconnaissance drone somewhere between the foothills and the basin. A solo task. No team to command, no rookie to watch, no negotiations with anyone breathing. He preferred it that way. Silence didn't bother him. At least, usually it didn't. He paused beside a stand of lodgepole pines, adjusting the strap of his tactical pack. Just ahead, half buried under the blowing snow, something cut across his path. A disturbance in the surface. A pattern. Jack crouched, brushing the snow aside with the back of his glove. Tire tracks. Rear wheel slightly misaligned. Not particularly unusual this deep in the woods. Hunters, rangers. sometimes couples who had more enthusiasm than sense, but beside the tire marks were footprints, large ones, heavy, belonging to an adult, and then smaller ones, much smaller, a child. Jack exhaled once through his nose, slow, measured. His breath fogged and drifted away. He shifted his light, scanning further ahead, and that was when he saw the next set of tracks. Tiny, spaced close together, weaving unpredictably. A puppy. He sat back on his heels. He did not like this. Not the storm, not the timing, not the location, and especially not the combination of all three. Jack straightened, looking into the swirling white ahead. He felt a small tug in his chest, subtle but unmistakable, and forced himself to ignore it. Civilian involvement meant paperwork, questions, deviations from orders. His CO hated deviations. The drone they'd lost wasn't classified, but the data on it mattered. Finding it quickly mattered. He took 3 steps forward, following the direction the tracks pointed, then stopped again as if his own body was fighting him. This wasn't his problem. This wasn't why he was here. This wasn't... A sharp flicker of memory cut through his thoughts. Just a single image, gone almost as soon as it came. A black and tan German shepherd leaping through whiteout conditions, snow spraying like shattered glass. Bishop's bark echoing through a storm thick enough to swallow sound, the sudden silence that followed. Jack blinked hard and forced the memory back down into its locked place. Not now. He was halfway through turning away when the wind shifted. It carried a faint sound he couldn't quite place. Not a cry, not an animal call, more like something small trying not to fall apart. He stood still, breath held. He listened again. Nothing, but the unease wouldn't let go, this time. Jack closed his eyes for half a second and muttered under his breath, as if arguing with himself. Then he turned toward the tracks. He didn't tell himself why he was doing it. He didn't try to justify it. He simply began walking. Sometimes you didn't need a reason. Sometimes a man just moved because stillness felt worse than the storm. Jack spotted them only because something small moved against the base of a fallen tree, a faint shift in the snow that didn't match the rhythm of the wind. He slowed, letting his senses sharpen the way they always did before stepping into a room that might hold danger. But what he found wasn't danger. It was a child. A tiny girl curled into herself, arms wrapped around a German shepherd puppy that was doing everything it could to stay between her and the wind. Lily Carter's eyes were half open, unfocused, lashes crusted with frost. Her lips were pale. Her breaths shallow enough to make Jack's stomach tighten. Copper was shaking so hard his whole body quivered, but when Jack moved closer, the puppy pushed his paws into the snow and lifted himself to stand. He placed his tiny body in front of Lily, wobbling, barking a sound so hoarse it was hardly a bark at all, like he thought he could defend her, like he believed he had to. Jack knelt fast, brushing the snow from Lily's hair with a gentleness he didn't know he still possessed. Her skin was cold, too cold, her fingers stiff where they clutched Copper's fur. He didn't speak right away. Words didn't matter as much as speed. He checked her breathing, weak but steady. He touched her wrist. Thready pulse. Her sweater was soaked. The storm had glued it to her skin. She wouldn't last long like this. Neither would the puppy. The temperature was dropping by the minute. The light was fading. And they were in terrain that could turn deadly after dark. He lifted his head, scanning instinctively. No movement. No tracks leading back toward them. Whoever left her here wasn't coming back. Jack exhaled once, and that single breath carried more weight than he expected. His options were limited, and both were bad. Option 1, his temporary military shelter 5 miles north. thin insulation, a compact stove, enough for one adult for one night, not nearly enough to treat early hypothermia in a child. She'd deteriorate before morning. Option 2, Henry and May Whittaker's cabin 5 miles south, elderly, off-grid, no vehicle, but warm, stocked, safe. But that meant carrying a child and a puppy through a storm that could turn on him without warning. Jack stared at Lily for a long second. She was so small he could see her ribs move when she breathed. Copper let out another thin bark, pressing his head stubbornly against her cheek as if begging her to wake up. Something in Jack's chest shifted. Not the memory of Bishop. Not fully. But its echo. A reminder of another storm. Another moment when seconds decided who lived and who didn't. Lily shivered violently, her body jerking once before going still again. That was enough. Jack didn't hesitate anymore. He slid one arm under Lily's knees, the other around her shoulders, lifting her gently from the snow. She was feather light, her head falling against his chest. Copper scrambled after them, whining, trying to climb up Jack's leg. Jack scooped him with one gloved hand and tucked him securely against Lily, inside his jacket. Copper whimpered once, then went quiet, pressed between the only 2 warm bodies he had. Jack rose to his full height, adjusting the weight so he wouldn't jostle her. No explanation, no plan spoken aloud. Just movement. Purpose. The storm clawed at him as he turned south, snow blasting into his face. He leaned his body into the wind, boots digging deep for balance. Behind him, the tree where he found them disappeared into the blur of white. Ahead of him, somewhere through the storm, the Whittaker's cabin waited with its old wooden walls, its steady fire, and the 2 people who had once told him, "If you're ever in trouble out here, son, you come to us." He tightened his hold on the child and the trembling pup, speaking only once, under his breath, a quiet promise that came out before he could think to stop it. "I've got you. Both of you." Then he pushed forward into the storm, one step at a time, refusing to look back. The Whittaker cabin was the kind of place the forest seemed to protect out of respect. Tucked between 2 aging ponderosa pines, its windows glowed with a soft amber light that cut through the storm like a lantern held up for the lost. Henry Whittaker opened the door before Jack could knock. His grey beard was dusted with flour from whatever he'd been making before the wind began to wail. He didn't say a word at first. His eyes dropped to the unconscious child in Jack's arms, then to the trembling puppy pressed against her. Something inside the old man tightened, but he stepped aside without question. "Bring her in, son." May Whittaker moved even faster than her husband. Small, silver-haired, soft around the edges in a way that made people instinctively trust her. She cleared a space near the hearth and laid down a thick quilt patched from shirts Henry had worn when he was younger. Jack lowered Lily carefully onto it. Copper let out a weak cry when he lost her warmth, so Jack placed him right against her ribs before peeling off his jacket. The room warmed around them, the air thick with the scent of burning pine and something faintly sweet. Cinnamon, perhaps, or cloves. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, time slowed to a steady, quiet pulse. May's hands trembled as she draped another blanket over Lily. She kept smoothing it, pausing, smoothing it again, as if afraid the child might vanish if she didn't keep touching her. When May finally spoke, her voice wavered the way a memory does when it surfaces without warning. "She's so cold. Henry, bring the thicker one, the blue wool." Henry didn't answer. He was already moving. He threw another log onto the fire, too large, too much, but he seemed unable to judge the weight in his own hands. Flames climbed higher in a sudden flare. He didn't blink. Jack watched him for a moment. He had seen men go still like that in the field, their minds yanked backward to a place their bodies hadn't left yet. He returned his focus to Copper, lifting the pup so he could feel more of the fire's warmth. Copper twitched, then burrowed into Lily's side. His tiny chest rose and fell with shaky breaths. Jack felt something shift, subtle but sharp, beneath his ribs. Bishop had done that once. Pressed himself against Jack after dragging him out of a collapsed snow shelf, refusing to lie down until Jack's hands finally stopped shaking. Bishop had stayed awake the entire night just to keep watch. Copper's trembling body wasn't Bishop's. The rhythm was different, the weight less. But the loyalty, raw, instinctive, desperate, carried the same shape. Jack blinked away the memory. Not now. Outside the window, the storm softened. The wind that had screamed through the treetops moments earlier now brushed against the cabin like an exhausted breath. Snowflakes drifted instead of slashed. The forest, battered and bruised, seemed to inhale slowly. May touched Lily's cheek and froze at how cold it still felt. Her face tightened, pained and familiar. It wasn't the storm she feared. It was the echo of a grief she'd carried for decades. A baby she'd never had the chance to bring home. A nursery she and Henry had packed away too quietly. A silence that never really left their house. Henry returned with the blue blanket. When he laid it over Lily, his hands hovered for a moment, unsure where to rest. Jack didn't speak. Neither did the Whitakers. The fire snapped. Copper whimpered. Lily shuddered faintly under the blankets, her body fighting its way back toward warmth. Jack leaned back on his heels, eyes drifting again toward the little shepherd. The way Copper nudged closer whenever Lily's breathing hitched. The way the pup forced his fragile body to act braver than it was. The present overlapped with the past. A new storm sat on top of an old one. Outside, the wind faded into a distant murmur. Inside, nothing truly quieted. Not May's grief. Not Henry's buried ache. Not Jack's memory of a dog who had once saved his life and disappeared into a world of white. The storm had softened, but their wounds hadn't. And as Lily slept, still pale, still fragile, each of them understood without speaking that whatever story brought her here was nowhere near finished. Lily woke slowly, the way someone surfaces from a dream they never wanted to enter. Her eyelids fluttered as the firelight flickered across her face, warming skin that had been frighteningly cold hours earlier. Copper, curled against her ribs, was the first thing she reached for. Her small hand found his fur, and the pup let out a soft yelp of relief. May leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" Lily blinked, disoriented, scanning the room as if trying to remember what safety looked like. Her gaze landed on Jack next. A stranger, but the kind who made a child feel like they didn't need to hide. "You're safe," Jack said quietly. "You're warm now." Lily swallowed, a movement so small it might have been missed. Then her body stiffened as memory hit her all at once. She pushed up on her elbows, breath quickening. "Where's my dad?" No one answered right away. Henry's jaw flexed. May's hands tightened on the edge of the quilt. Jack shifted closer, lowering his voice. "Lily, what happened out there?" She hesitated, eyes darting between their faces. Copper whined softly, sensing her fear. Lily held him tighter, as if his small weight kept her from slipping apart. "Dad! He said Copper needed a checkup." Lily's voice cracked on the word "Dad." He drove past the road to the rescue center. He kept going even when I told him it wasn't the right way. Jack felt something cold settle beneath his ribs. Not the storm cold, but something sharper. Lily continued, tears gathering. He stopped the car in the woods. He told me to get out. Said Copper needed to stretch so he wouldn't be scared. Henry's breath left him in a heavy, broken sound. "Did he get out with you?" May asked softly. Lily shook her head. "No, He shoved me out and threw some snow at Copper when Copper barked. And then, her lips trembled violently, he drove away. A silence so complete it felt like the cabin itself was holding its breath. Jack didn't look at the Whitakers, and they didn't look at him. The truth lay bare between them, ugly and undeniable. Not an accident, not a misunderstanding, a choice. Lily wiped her nose on her sleeve, her voice shrinking into something too fragile for a child her age. I tried to follow the tire tracks, but they disappeared. May pulled her into a soft embrace, careful not to squeeze too hard. Lily clutched Copper with one hand and May's sweater with the other, as if afraid one of them would disappear like the car did. Jack stood slowly. His training told him the next step was straightforward. Call it in. Let law enforcement take it from here. Protocol was clear. A child abandoned in lethal conditions required immediate reporting. But Protocol didn't know the Whitakers. Protocol didn't know what Mark Carter was capable of. Protocol didn't know the kind of men who looked at custody, inheritance, and control as things to win rather than earn. Henry broke the silence first, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Jack, we can't send her back to that man. Not tonight. Not ever until the truth comes out. May nodded, her chin trembling. If they take her to a hospital, he'll know exactly where to find her. Jack hesitated. Not because he disagreed, but because every option in front of them came with consequences. The right thing wasn't clear yet. The safe thing even less so. He reached down to adjust the blanket around Copper and Lily. That was when he felt something cold and hard beneath the pup's collar. He frowned. Hold on. What's this? He gently lifted Copper's collar. A small, worn military tag swung against his fingertip. Scratched edges, faded engraving, but the name still clear. K9 Bishop, decommissioned. Jack froze. Henry leaned in. Something wrong? Jack didn't answer immediately. His mind sifted through memory, the last mission with Bishop, the snow, the cliff, the moment he realized his partner had disappeared beneath an avalanche of white. The military had told him Bishop was never found. But here was Bishop's tag, around the neck of a trembling puppy, tucked into the arms of a child who had been left to die. Jack swallowed, his voice low. This tag, it belonged to my K9. May stared between the tag and Jack. Are you sure? I would know his name anywhere. Jack murmured. Copper nudged his hand, oblivious to the weight of what he carried. Lily watched Jack's face carefully, sensing the shift in the room, but not understanding it. Jack closed his fist around the tag. His pulse thudded once, hard. We report this, he said, more to himself than anyone, but we do it the right way, not the fast way. Henry and May exchanged a glance, one built on years of shared pain, shared loss, and shared belief that sometimes you had to stand where others stepped back. Lily whispered, voice cracking. Am I in trouble? May hugged her closer. No, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. You're safe with us. Jack looked at Lily, at Copper pressed into her side, at the tag glinting faintly in the firelight. Leaving would have been easier. The dog chose harder. And now, so would Jack. Because someone had left this child to freeze. Someone had buried the truth in snow and silence. And standing in that warm cabin, with the storm finally fading outside, Jack understood something with absolute clarity. He wasn't walking away. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a pale, heavy quiet that settled over the mountains like a warning rather than relief. Inside the Whitaker cabin, the fire burned low, crackling softly as Jack moved through the small kitchen with the focused silence of a man preparing himself for something he didn't want to find. Lily and Copper slept curled together on the sofa under May's quilts. Henry sat at the table, pretending to read the newspaper he'd unfolded, but his eyes never moved across the page. May poured coffee with hands that still shook more than she admitted. Jack stepped outside to make the call. The cold morning air bit his skin, but it helped him think. He took out his encrypted phone and dialed a contact he rarely used unless the stakes were real. Carla Ruiz, an FBI agent he trusted because she didn't scare easily, and because she didn't ask for details unless someone's life was on the line. She answered on the second ring. "Jack, why do I feel like you're about to ruin my Saturday?" He didn't waste time. "I need a background check on Mark Carter. Fast. Wife's name is Vanessa Cole, former PR director for Aurora Ridge Technologies. And I need everything on Rachel Carter." There was a pause, brief but telling. "Jack, Rachel Carter is dead." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I need the rest." Carla exhaled, then her fingers began typing. Jack could hear her cadence even through the static. He leaned his shoulder against the railing, watching a slow line of smoke curl from the chimney. Inside, May was humming weakly as she washed dishes, too softly to be real comfort. Henry stared at the motionless trees. When Carla spoke again, her voice was different. Lower, sharper. "Jack, this isn't just messy, this is dangerous. Tell me." Rachel Carter wasn't just a CEO. She was the CEO. Aurora Ridge made half the diagnostic tech used in small hospitals across the Northwest. Her patents alone are worth over $40 million. Her personal assets, stocks, real estate, intellectual property, push it even higher. Jack said nothing, forcing himself not to look through the window toward the sleeping child. Carla continued, voice tightening. "There's a trust. For Lily. And it's big. Really big." "How big?" $80 million once she turns 18. Managed by an outside financial group, only one person listed as temporary guardian in the event of Rachel's death. Mark Carter. Jack closed his eyes. Carla's voice softened. "I wish I were done, but I'm not. Go on. If Lily dies before she reaches adulthood, the trust reverts. Not to the state, not to charity, not to Rachel's company, to Mark, and by extension to Vanessa Cole." The forest around him seemed to tilt, not sharply, just enough to make breathing feel heavier. Carla wasn't finished. "There's more. Transfers from Rachel's accounts toward a shell corporation in Wyoming. The signature on them isn't hers, and Vanessa's name appears on 2 documents I'm pretty sure are forged." Jack pressed a hand against the railing. "Carla, you're telling me—" "I'm telling you it wasn't abandonment out of panic. It wasn't a mistake. This was premeditated. And if Lily hadn't survived that storm, Mark's financial problems would have evaporated overnight." Jack didn't respond. He couldn't. The truth was not a revelation. It was a weight, settling into him with the quiet certainty of a burden he had subconsciously expected. When Carla spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You need to keep that girl hidden. I'll start the paperwork, but someone willing to leave a child in that kind of cold isn't going to wait quietly for the law to catch up." Jack ended the call slowly, each movement deliberate, controlled, not shocked, not shaken, just accepting. Because he'd seen this before. Not this exact thing, not this exact cruelty, but the shape of it, what desperation did to people who valued themselves above the lives they were supposed to protect. He stepped back inside. Henry looked up first. The old man's eyes had the stiff, braced tension of someone preparing for bad news. May held a mug halfway to the table, frozen in place. Jack didn't cushion the truth. He didn't soften it. It didn't deserve softening. Mark left her there on purpose. May's breath caught. Henry's hands clenched around the newspaper, crushing the pages. Jack continued, steady and factual. Rachel Carter left Lily a trust. A large one. Tens of millions. If Lily dies before turning 18, everything goes to Mark. And Vanessa. May sat down slowly, as if her knees couldn't hold her anymore. Henry whispered, "That poor child." Jack looked at Lily, still bundled in blankets, her small fingers tangled in Copper's fur. She had survived the night, but the truth waiting for her was colder than the storm she'd just escaped. This wasn't a rescue anymore. This was protection, a responsibility that didn't ask Jack's permission before settling around his shoulders. He walked toward the fire, staring at the tag still hanging from Copper's collar, Bishop's name etched into the metal like a reminder of promises Jack had failed to keep. Not this time. He didn't speak his next thought out loud. He didn't need to. This child was not going back to Mark Carter. Not until the truth was dragged into the light. Not until the law was ready. Not until Lily was safe in a way she had never been before. And Jack understood something with complete, quiet certainty. The cold wasn't the real danger. The storm wasn't the real enemy. The threat was a man who shared Lily's blood, and Jack Mercer would not let him near her again. The snow had settled into a thin, white hush across the valley by the time Jack sent the last encrypted file to Carla Ruiz. The Whitaker cabin, usually filled with the soft clatter of May's cooking or Henry's slow shuffle of boots, felt unusually still that morning. Even the fire burned quieter, as if the room itself understood something irreversible had begun. There was no dramatic phone call, no countdown, no command shouted through static. Just a single text from Carla. "We have enough. I'm moving now." Jack put the phone down. He didn't smile, he didn't relax, but something in his shoulders eased, not released, not fully, but enough for him to breathe the way a man breathes when he's been holding danger in his lungs too long. Inside the living room, Lily sat at the table tracing Copper's paw on a piece of scrap paper May had found for her. Copper lay sprawled across her lap, half asleep, half guarding her in that instinctive way shepherds did even before they were properly trained. Lily hummed under her breath, a tune with no real melody, but the kind children use when the world finally feels a little safer. May watched her from the kitchen doorway, eyes soft, hands folded, against her chest. Henry stood near the fire, pretending to adjust a log while really watching everything at once. Lily, Jack, the world outside. None of them said a word about what was happening dozens of miles away in Bozeman. They didn't need to. Carla arrived at the Carter residence with 2 federal agents and a county sheriff. Not sirens, not lights flashing through the quiet neighborhood, but with a deliberate restraint that made the moment feel heavier than any dramatic raid could have. Mark Carter opened the door, still wearing the same arrogance he had carried for years. That expression faltered the moment he saw the badges. Vanessa stepped into the hallway in disbelief, mascara smudged from the previous night's arguments neither of them would admit to. She tried to demand an explanation, but her voice cracked before the second sentence. No one shouted, no one ran, no one reached for anything foolish. They were simply told the charges: conspiracy to commit homicide, attempted murder of a minor, financial fraud and embezzlement, child endangerment with intent. Vanessa's knees buckled. Mark tried to speak, but only managed a hollow, trembling sound. This was not the kind of fight anger could survive. Neighbors peeked through curtains, drawn by the movement but confused by the quiet. The agents didn't parade the couple down the driveway. They didn't force humiliation. They followed procedure with a professionalism that made the scene even more solemn. Quiet justice always carried a different weight. Mark asked one question as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. "Where is Lily?" No one answered him. He didn't deserve the comfort of knowing. Carla watched their cruiser pull away, long enough to ensure there were no last-minute complications. Then she sent Jack another short message. "It's done. She's safe. For now, focus on her healing." Back at the Whitaker cabin, Jack read the text and slid his phone into his pocket. His breath left him in a slow, controlled exhale. May wiped her eyes discreetly with the edge of her sleeve. Henry reached for her hand and squeezed it once. Copper lifted his head, ears pricking, sensing a change he couldn't name but trusted anyway. Lily looked up at Jack. "Is my dad coming here?" Jack knelt beside her, resting a hand on the table near her drawing. "No. He won't hurt you again, Lily. I promise." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face the way children do when deciding whether to believe an adult or not. Then she nodded, small and steady. Okay. No one celebrated. No one cheered. No one felt triumphant. Justice wasn't loud today. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't satisfying in the way revenge stories often tried to be. It was quiet, measured, heavy. Henry returned to tending the fire. May began cooking something warm even though no one had asked. Lily stroked Copper's fur until her breathing slowed again. Jack sat on the edge of the sofa, watching the flames rise and fall. For the first time since he found Lily in the snow, the room didn't feel trapped between fear and urgency. No one was punished more than they deserved. No one was rescued with fanfare. But somewhere far from the cabin, two people who had done something unforgivable were being held accountable, and the child who survived the coldest night of her life was now surrounded by people who refused to let harm ever touch her again. It wasn't victory, but it was right. And sometimes, in a world that rarely offered such moments, right was enough. Spring did not arrive with fanfare. It crept in slowly, quietly, melting the edges of winter the way healing often softens old wounds. One warm day, one thawed path, one gentle shift at a time. The snow that once swallowed sound now receded into the soil, revealing patches of green that pushed through like small acts of courage. At the Whitaker cabin, life rearranged itself into something simpler, steadier, and surprisingly full. Lily Carter, no longer the silent child trembling under blankets, woke each morning to the sound of Copper's paws scratching lightly at her door. The pup had doubled in size since winter, his legs too long for his body, his ears still a little floppy at the tips. But his devotion had grown even faster than he had. He followed Lily from room to room, yard to porch, shadow to sunbeam, as if the bond forged in the snow could not be undone by time or warmth. Henry and May had become her legal guardians after the court proceedings, and though neither had expected to become parents again in their 60s, they adapted with the quiet, patient grace of people who had learned long ago that love often arrives through the back door, without warning. The mornings were always calm. May packed Lily's lunch for school, slipping in an extra cookie when she thought Henry wasn't looking. Henry stood by the door, grumbling good-naturedly about fixing the mailbox again before the wind took it down for good. Lily tied her boots, humming, Copper sitting proudly beside her, as if escort duty were a noble assignment. Then came the short drive into town. The first day Lily stepped into her new classroom, she clutched Copper's collar so tightly that Henry had worried her fingers would go white. But the dog sat tall at her side, tail sweeping slowly across the floor, anchoring her. By March, Lily walked through those school doors by herself. By April, she greeted classmates with shy smiles. By May, she had a best friend who braided her hair at recess. Copper waited outside every afternoon, sitting in the shade of the flagpole like a sentry. The school staff learned quickly that trying to coax him away was pointless. When Lily appeared through the door, Copper launched into a joyful wiggle that made the teachers laugh every time. At home, Henry repaired the fences that winter storms had bullied. His hands were slower now, and the boards didn't line up perfectly, but he whistled while he worked, something May hadn't heard him do in years. May, apron dusted with flour more often than not, cooked with the kind of tenderness that came from having a child in the house again. Lily sat on the counter, swinging her feet, asking questions about recipes, watching as May folded dough or stirred soup with practiced hands. Copper had claimed a spot on the kitchen floor where sunlight landed each afternoon. He lay there, chin on his paws, ears twitching to every sound Lily made. And then there was Jack. He didn't visit every week, his job didn't allow that, but he came when he could. Sometimes on a quiet Saturday morning, sometimes on a Tuesday evening after a long assignment. The old truck's engine always signaled his arrival before he stepped out, boots crunching across the gravel. The first time he returned after the arrests, Lily ran to him. Not in the frantic way children cling to rescue, but in the relieved, steady way they greet someone who kept his promises. Copper barreled toward him right after, tail spinning wildly, jumping to plant his paws against Jack's legs. Jack knelt every time, ruffling the pup's growing fur, greeting Lily with a smile that never seemed forced. He helped Henry mend the roof after a windstorm. He helped May carry firewood she insisted she didn't need help with. He walked with Lily down by the creek, listening to her stories about school, Copper splashing in the shallows. Sometimes, at night, Jack sat on the porch with Henry while May and Lily cleaned up inside. The air was warm then, the frogs loud, the sky wide and full of stars. Henry would glance toward the yard, where Lily and Copper played until the last bit of daylight faded. "She laughs more now," Henry would say quietly. Jack nodded. She earned that laugh. It wasn't perfect, not for any of them. Lily still had nightmares some nights. Copper still startled at sudden loud noises. Henry's back still ached in the mornings. May still had days when old grief slipped into her smile. But the cabin had changed. There was music again, Lily humming, Copper thumping his tail. There was warmth again, soups simmering, sunlight spreading across wooden floors. There was purpose again, school lunches, mended fences, shared meals. Not perfect, but peaceful. And for the first time in a long time, peace felt like something they all believed could last. The storm had taken much, but the spring gave something back. By summer, the story that had once lived only in the quiet walls of the Whittaker cabin had begun to ripple outward, touching places none of them expected. It started at Lily's school. Teachers noticed how Copper waited every afternoon, sitting with a patience far beyond his age. He never barked, never pushed, never wandered. He simply stayed, eyes fixed on the door until Lily appeared. Children asked about him. Teachers asked about Lily. And gradually, gently, the truth of where she had come from began to weave through the school halls, not in whispers of pity, but in murmurs of admiration. The girl who survived the storm, the puppy who never left her side, the man who found them, the couple who gave them a home. At the spring assembly, Lily stood in front of her classmates, knees knocking, hands trembling, and spoke for the first time about Copper. Not the storm, not the cold, just Copper. How he stayed with her, how he kept her warm, how he made her feel brave again. The gym fell silent. Teachers wiped their eyes. And Copper, sitting proudly beside the stage, wagged his tail as if he understood every word. At church, the Whittakers' pastor dedicated a Sunday message to the quiet kinds of miracles, the ones that do not roar, but arrive softly through snow and sacrifice. Lily sat between Henry and May, Copper lying across her feet like a warm blanket. People approached them afterward. Some offered prayers, some offered casseroles, some simply rested a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder, letting her know she was seen, that her life mattered, that she had a community now. But the story traveled farthest among veterans. Jack never asked for recognition. But word spread anyway, about the seal who followed footprints in a storm, the K9 tag discovered on a puppy's collar, the child he refused to leave behind, the justice served without noise or vengeance. Veterans at the local VFW hall began telling the story the way old soldiers tell truths they admire, gruffly, without embellishment, but with a weight that meant respect. One night, the veterans invited Lily and Copper to visit. She sat in a circle of worn leather chairs, clutching Copper's leash as a group of men, tough, scarred, calloused, leaned down to greet her with smiles that were softer than their voices. A retired ranger gave Copper a patched-up harness. A Marine painted Lily a wooden sign that read, "You are stronger than the storm." A Navy medic handed Jack a faded photo of her own canine from years ago, whispering, "He'd be proud of what you did." Out of these moments, quiet, steady, unplanned, an idea began to form. It was May who said it aloud first. This shouldn't just be our story. It should help others too. Henry nodded as if he'd been waiting for someone to speak the words. Jack listened, leaning forward. And Lily, her hand resting over Copper's heartbeat, whispered, Maybe there are other kids who need dogs too." The decision was made that night. A month later, with the help of Carla Ruiz, the support of the school district, the church, the VFW hall, and donations from people moved by the story of a child and her loyal pup, the community opened a new center on the east side of Bozeman, Rachel's Haven, named for the mother Lily lost, dedicated to children who needed a soft place to land, designed to pair rescue dogs with kids who had been through storms of their own. The building wasn't big, an old community hall refurbished with paint and elbow grease, but it was bright and warm. A mural on the outside wall showed a little girl in a pink sweater kneeling beside a shepherd pup. They faced the same direction, looking not at the cold behind them, but at the horizon ahead. Inside, the rooms filled quickly. Children traced Copper's paw prints on colored paper. Volunteers taught basic dog care. Veterans shared stories with teens who didn't trust easily. Teachers used therapy dogs to help anxious students read aloud. Lily helped younger kids overcome their fear of big dogs by showing how Copper would lie down and wait patiently for them to approach. Copper became a symbol, not of heroism in the loud, dramatic sense, but of the kind of loyalty that could change the trajectory of a life. And Lily, once terrified, once abandoned, became a child who walked into each session with her shoulders straighter, her smile easier, her hand steady as she guided other kids to place their palms on Copper's warm fur. She learned to laugh again. She learned to trust again. She learned love didn't have to hurt. In the corner of the center's main room hung a framed plaque, "Legacy of the storm born in the cold, carried by courage, kept alive by love, for every child who thinks they must walk alone." Jack saw it for the first time on a quiet Saturday morning when he returned from a mission. Lily led him there by the hand. Copper trotted beside him, tail wagging. Jack stood silently, reading the words. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Because the legacy wasn't his. It wasn't even Lily's alone. It belonged to everyone who chose compassion over convenience, protection over indifference, courage over silence. And it was only just beginning. The first snow of early winter drifted down in slow, wandering flakes, the kind that didn't sting or bite, but settled gently on the ground like a quiet reminder of seasons past. Not a storm, not a threat, just winter returning the way it was meant to. Jack Mercer stood at the edge of the Whitakers' yard, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, watching Lily and Copper race across the thin layer of white that had gathered overnight. Lily had grown taller over the months, more sure of her steps, more certain of her voice. Copper, no longer the trembling pup from the storm, bounded ahead with legs that still seemed too big for his body, skidding and tumbling with joyful abandon. Every time he fell, Lily laughed. Every time Lily laughed, Copper barked in triumph. and each sound carved a little more warmth into the cold morning air. Henry leaned against the porch railing, a mug of coffee steaming in his hands. May stood beside him, her apron dusted with flour as always, smiling as Lily flopped backward into the snow, Copper immediately curling beside her like a loyal shadow. Jack watched them with a stillness that felt earned rather than forced. For months he had been moving, between bases, assignments, training missions, yet somehow every mile he traveled seemed to lead back here, back to this cabin. Back to the family he never expected to have. Back to a little girl who had survived the worst night of her life. And back to a dog who had carried echoes of another life Jack once thought was over. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the old K9 tag he kept there now, the one he'd taken from Copper's collar months earlier. Bishop's name, worn but still clear, caught the faint winter light. Bishop had been the dog who saved him. The dog he lost. The dog he never stopped searching for. Not really. Jack closed his hand around the tag, feeling the familiar weight press into his palm. Maybe he would never have answers about what happened in that blizzard years ago. Maybe some truths stayed buried under snow that never melted. But standing here, watching Lily's smile stretch wide, watching Copper run without fear, Jack understood something that loosened a knot inside him he hadn't realized was still tied. Not everything lost stays gone. Some things return in ways you don't expect. A different dog, a different child, a different life to protect. Lily sat up in the snow and waved at him. Jack raised a hand back, a small gesture but enough to make her grin and race toward him, with Copper bounding behind her. She collapsed against his leg, catching her breath between giggles. Copper nosed at Jack's hand until he crouched down to rub behind the dog's ears. "You two doing okay out here?" Jack asked, though his voice softened in a way he didn't bother hiding. Lily nodded, brushing snow from her mittens. "Copper likes winter more now. I think he's braver." Jack smiled. "You both are." May called from the porch that breakfast was nearly ready. Lily and Copper sprinted toward her, slipping and laughing the whole way. Henry shook his head with a fondness he didn't try to conceal. Jack stayed where he was for a moment longer, letting the quiet settle. The snow continued to fall, slow and peaceful, nothing like the night he had first heard Copper's desperate whine through the wind. He drew a breath and released it into the cold morning air. Not burdened, not haunted, just present. Many people who hear stories like this say it reminds them of someone they once loved, or someone they once failed to protect. Jack looked toward the cabin. The laughter, the warmth, the life rebuilt from a night that should have ended differently, and felt the truth of those words settle deep. Some storms end in tragedy. Some storms end in rescue. But the rarest storms end in a second chance. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that loyalty still exists, that compassion still saves, and that even in the coldest moments, there is hope waiting to be found. And if you've ever known a dog, or a person, who stayed by your side when it mattered most, tell us about them. Your story might be the warmth someone else needs today.